regarding the Owen McDonald debate that I had, you said you only watched like the first few minutes of it. I think that in the later half, I don't know, you might find it to be pretty cringy, but you likely find it rather disagreeable on my part. I did not answer the questions quite as straightforward as I should have.
Uh, was the whole debate about abortion?
It wasn't wholeheartedly about abortion. Like the first 40 minutes was about abortion, which pretty much everybody thinks that I kicked Owen's ass on. And then like the last hour and something minutes was about racism and about the whole Bacon Gate situation.
Uh, the whole it's been how long since the bacon?
Over a year. Over a
Yeah.
year.
Um.
Although it's
Well,
still being played out now because S-Man got in some shit with Owen earlier.
yeah. I slept through it and woke up to people upset, and now and just some things happen, and I kind of want to punch some people in the face. And not S Man. I think S Man was dumb for making that for posting those memes, but
Hmm.
but he was but he knows that that he wouldn't say that shit to my face. So
Yeah.
if I was awake at the time and I stepped in, that shit would have ended real quick, fast, in a hurry.
And one of the questions that I was not direct enough on was that Owen asked me if I would call him a nigger. And I guess I should have said just right off the bat, just for the current situation and for us to get on with the freaking debate, was no. But ultimately, my answer was kind of a roundabout way of saying that I don't know if maybe in the most extreme of circumstances. Um, I mean, what would you think? Would you find yourself like if somebody of a different race was to do something extreme to you or somebody you love, would you end up flying off the handle and throwing out a racial slur their way, applicable to their race?
I like to pride myself on on my own restraint, but if there, I will never say that that won't ever happen. I'll put it this way:
Yeah.
if if let's say a Latino person was being extremely anti-black, which isn't that far from which isn't that uncommon, if you to be honest, and if a Latino person was being very anti-black and I was pissed off enough, I might make a I might make a joke about ICE or something. But I wouldn't call them a slur or anything.
Hey, I make jokes about ice towards S, man.
I I make a though I made one ICE joke rather recently when I saw this video of some immigrant guy who was a who was apparently a Trump supporter. He had a Trump shirt on, was yelling obscenities at this black guy, and I just post and under the tweet posted I posted saying me calling ICE, and it had a GIF of Tom from Tom and Jerry at the phone. This is the joke that I made. Yeah, it was under this post. Yeah,
White immigrant with Trump T-shirt threatens to call police while insulting black man with every racial slur he could think of.
yeah. That was something, and I was just like,
Me calling ICE. And that's something kind of quite interesting, which I guess I'll put this as a subject of conversation as well. Was there something that I found quite interesting about your stream with Lapis is that you made the comment. Okay, actually, I want to sum up. I want to end off. I want to put aside the one thing mentioned about the Owen stream, and I will say that if an extreme circumstance did happen between me and somebody of a different race, I would apply some major restraint to try and not call him a racial slur, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, I cannot make no promises.
Hey, it is my position that most people are casually racist anyway. So
Hmm.
you know, I don't.
Like with their sense of humor.
Oh yeah, It- some of the shit that I have that goes through my mind, I'm like, damn, I'd be called racist if I said this shit.
Brandon says you should have called Owen a shit covered cracker.
That's so mean.
Wow, Brandon. Although, to Brandon's credit, he does act more white than anything.
I do wish that Owen would talk more about racial issues, particularly. I'm curious to what racial issues he experiences in the United Kingdom. I've heard that country is
Yeah,
extremely xenophobic, so I'm
I
curious to what
mean,
he experiences.
it seems that he's more focused on internet racist harassment than racially biased statistics, real life statistics, which is kind of the petty thing about him. He'd be focusing more on, hey, this guy got called a racial slur on the internet more than the arrest rates or whatever, like you mentioned a little bit earlier on the same stream.
I would love to take Owen down to Mississippi for a week. That's where my family's from. You know, he can see that racism is very casual in the deeper parts of the South. So I'm curious to how he would respond to it
Mm.
if he
Which
would actually
that's
talk about it more.
something that I guess we'll move on to. Now, you mentioned like that one video you were showing right there. Something that you mentioned in the Lapis stream is that the further right white people, they would be more obnoxious and just be committing verbal harassment against people of different races. That would be how they would express their racism more than they would actually just call the police on them. But then you have the more centrist, liberal types or whatever that would be more casual with their racism and call the police instead or something like that.
I think that reactionaries are more likely to be openly racist, though that's starting to that's but they're starting to take the hint that maybe being openly racist is wrong. And but liberals in my opinion don't really oppose racism so much, they don't like to see it so obviously about, like they don't want like they don't mind they if they can plausibly deny it, they will.
Hmm.
And that's the problem that I have, because at the end of the day, the system itself uh, doesn't like open racism and discrimination because it's a bad look, and
Hmm.
it doesn't protect the system from any sort of revolt. But if the system doesn't have to change, all it has to do is be quieter about it, then it doesn't have to worry about any sort of revolt from ethnic minorities. And that's
Hmm.
what it tends to do, especially in northern and western states.
Interesting. I kind of want to rewind the conversation a bit back to a comment you made. You said that the South is casually racist, which is kind of odd because I remember you saying in past streams that the South is not racist, at least relatively speaking to like extreme racism. But anyway, you want to explain what you mean by the South is casually racist?
I don't recall saying that. I don't recall saying that the South isn't racist. That would be dishonest on my part.
Hmm.
But I will say that the South isn't any more racist than the rest of the country. It's just the South has a little bit of a different character to it. Like, for example, the South is a bit more open about it in terms of their bigotry. If you want to if you really wanted to make someone feel like if you really wanted to be openly racist to someone, you're more likely to see that type of you'll see more of that in the South than you'll see elsewhere. In like here up in the northern states, in the Midwest, for example, I'm here in Chicago. It's more passive aggressive. Um, a lot of people will just smile to your face, but think horrible things about you, and then treat you that way. But they
Hmm.
won't. But they won't be like they won't call you an N word to your face or anything.
Right.
They won't. They won't you know, burn a cross on your lawn or anything, but they will. But they will. You you're probably going to experience a lot of hiring discrimination here. Your neighborhoods are going to be extremely segregated. Like the whole like Chicago, the north side, which is where most of the money is, by the way, is mostly, white. Then the west side is mostly Latino, and then the south side is mostly black and Latino, with a couple of poor working class white neighborhoods in the deep south part of the city. So the
You know,
cities,
this kind of reminds me of the one skit by Eddie Griffin. Have you heard of Eddie Griffin, right?
I don't think so.
He's a comedian, and he made like a skit called "Sneaky White People" or something like that. And he always said the joke was basically that he could get along more with some redneck who will be more bluntly like have a racist language. He can get along with them more than with a sneaky white person. Like for example, he would be doing a comedy skit in the South, and one of the Southerners would be all like, "You's a funny nigga" or something like that. But then, like he does one in the North or something like that, and he'll get that one guy who will say, "Yeah, it was all right," referring to his skit, and then walks away, just says behind his back, "Nigger." Yeah, that was a joke. I mean, would you like sum up uh, the South's racism more like the more blunt redneck that Eddie Griffin, for example, could get along with? Would you sum him up as that?
Yeah, I would. Uh, yeah, except in my home state of Virginia, it's a little different
Well, yeah,
because
Virginia is kind of sandwiched. They have like that crossing culture of South United States and North United States. But go
yeah,
on.
the a lot of northerners migrated to Virginia in the last 40 years. So so it's lost. So while the city's become city, oh my god. While the state is becoming more progressive itself, it's still it the racism still isn't as overt as it once was. And my grandparents who moved to Virginia from Mississippi in the 1970s pointed that out, that it wasn't quite as overt, and we kind of miss that in Mississippi, because now we don't know, because it's about trust. You don't know who you can trust now, because people will stab you in the back and pretend they was friends with you the whole time. But here, but in the South, people who don't fucks with you don't fucks with you.
So, still on the subject of racism, one thing that was brought up in my interview with Hawk, and you had witnessed this yourself, and we were talking about racial preferences, like what racial preferences that people uh, want. Okay, what people physically prefer, racially speaking. Like some white dudes might most prefer black girls, or some might most prefer Asian girls, or something like that. And I was kind of making the point that by definition, it is milk toast. Like it ain't bigotry necessarily, but it is like by definition some milk. It's milk toast racism. It's kind of a, but yeah, and then you kind of made some comments about that. I do not know if you want to like elaborate your disagreements or whatever.
I do not believe that. I don't believe that not wanting to fuck someone because of their race is necessarily racist, or at least or at least if it is, it's not something that's worth my activism. Because, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not here to pressure people to have sex with me or to date me. That is that's immoral in my opinion. And so I get and in my and as someone who used to complain a lot about white boys not wanting to date me or whatever, I now come to the realization that that had a lot more to do with my how I viewed myself than how I viewed them. Because, at the time I was very my attitude to me towards myself as a if my attitude towards myself as a black person was so negative that I felt like the only validation that I could get was by dating a white person. And I don't have that feeling anymore. So now when I see on Grinder and shit like that, white people talking about how they don't want black folks or Asians to message them, I'm just like, okay, you wasn't attractive anyways. So for me, it doesn't bother me like I used to. What bugs me, I think what bugs me more is when I see black guys do what I did and ignore, other black guys in favor of dating someone outside of race, because at that point it's like,
And
damn,
just FYI here, everybody, Boomer is gay.
extremely.
Oh boy.
But seeing so seeing people talk about their racial preferences in dating, I'm just like, in a perfect world, you wouldn't prefer someone just because of their color or their ethnic background. But this ain't a
Yeah,
perfect world. So
I mean, ultimately, despite the racial preference that I may have, I mean, it's not like that's the only thing that I take into consideration when I want to date somebody. Like, for example, I said in that stream that my primary racial preference is black gals, although Latinas come to a close second. But at the same time, I want somebody with a compatible personality as well. Like somebody who's like at least partially into nerd culture, for example, and somebody with similar enough beliefs to my own. Otherwise, we are not going to get along that well. But
yeah,
I kind of just wanted to show this to say what I mean towards people. Definition of racism: a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Now, that's not the definition I'm referring to in this case, but moving on, a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles, a political or social system founded on racism or racial prejudice or discrimination. Now, the first two definitions is not what I am meaning when I say that racial preferences are at least by definition racist. And I would not even say that the first half of the third definition here is what classifies it. It's the discrimination part, because by definition, you are discriminating on who you want to date, but
oh shit,
you're not just discriminating on race, you're discriminating on personality as well on who you want to date.
oh shit, I might be racist. Dun dun dun.
Da 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 ba ba ba. But yeah,
It's it's I.
I mean,
I'm being racist.
people discriminate on who they want uh to be as their president. Like, not even talking about the 2016 election, because that was a man versus a woman, or questionable as to whether either of them were men or women. For all we know, they're Hillary and Trump are probably both aliens from outer space. But anyway, take for example 2000 Bush versus Gore. People were like discriminating between the two's political ideologies, or at least self-proclaimed political ideologies, for who they wanted to vote for. I think that the word discriminate, I mean, for example, I typically discriminate on what my taste of music is. Like, typically, I don't really like rap. I mean, some older rap I can possibly get into, but typically speaking, I like rock more.
Oh, that's racist. How dare you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I like white people music only. How dare I?
Actually, to be honest, rock might be one of those instances of cultural appropriation.
Right. I mean, I'll get to that here in a little bit, but I think that the word discrimination has a little bit more of a negative stigma than needed, and that might be a little bit of a hot take that'll be taken out of context, but still.
Well, I'm sure that that hot take won't won't get you called out anytime soon by certain peoples.
Oh boy, oh boy. Making racist jokes. What would you say that makes a person? Would you say that that makes them that participates in making somebody a casual racist, but doesn't necessarily make them an intolerant bigot?
Um, I think it depends on the motivations and mentality behind the jokes. It also depends on how knowledgeable the people are of the ethnic groups they're talking shit about. See,
Well, I'm talking just purely like jokes. Like, say, for example, Louis C.K., Eddie Griffin, or Gabriel Iglesias, aka Fluffy, those types of comedians who would be making kind of racist jokes, you know?
well, I'll put it this way. Are you familiar with Richard Pryor?
Name sounds familiar. Go, but
Yeah.
what is he?
Well, a lot of his what's his word? Oh, his humor is very racially oriented, and
Hmm.
and because of how racially oriented it is, it makes his jokes a hell of a lot funnier. Like, and he be and he's a black guy, and he's dead now, but he was a black guy, and he'd be clowning both black people and white people, but when the way he clowns white people tends to be based on, you know, how we know white people, as you know, tends to be going after the suburbanite type white folks for the
Hmm.
most part. And then the way he talks about black folks is how he knows them, and it's very personal because we relate to everything that we go through, even if you know, even if we didn't share the same economic background. There's a lot of cultural things that we're very attuned to when he talks about black when he makes jokes about black people. Meanwhile, you have a lot of people from other groups who aren't quite in tune with black culture, and so they rely so heavily on stereotypes that their jokes sometimes just come off in bad faith.
Rather
uh,
false stereotypes.
yeah.
You mentioned Richard Pryor and how a whole lot of his humor would rely on racial stereotypes, but kind of going full circle back to my original question, would you say that he is by definition racist, but not necessarily a bigot in that sense?
Yeah, I could say that. He's definitely, you know, I
Would you
would say that.
would you
Yeah.
say that if people like me or S-Man or whoever like gone knocking on black stereotypes, would you say that we are casually racist but not necessarily bigots?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. I guess the main thing that people get whenever they be saying "you fucking racist" is that they're meaning like in the bigoted sense. They be calling them a racist, and that typically that is how that the word racist gets used when somebody be calling somebody else a racist. Is that they're calling them a bigot, uh,
Yeah.
completely intolerant, and having some kind of inferiority or superiority complex towards the other race. Like, for example, Donald Trump in his opening speech for president saying that Mexicans are rapists and murderers. And even when I first heard that speech, I thought, yeah, that does come off as pretty fucking racist, like in the bigoted sense, too.
Yeah,
By the way, not in like by definition it's racist, but at the same time it's not bigoted. No, it was bigoted,
yeah. Like I,
or at least is bigoted language, anyways.
my thing is by definition, by definition, most people are subconsciously racist. And look, I can admit I have my own racial prejudices. Fucking white people. But
Ha
but
ha.
you know, but I also recognize that most people aren't maliciously, you know, racist. Not all people are bigots. And I tend to distinguish between the
Okay,
two because, you know, if I
that's
call some
cool.
if I call someone racist, I'm not always calling them a bad person. And I'm not always trying to call them a bad person. I'm just
I've
saying, hmm?
I honestly kind of feel like that's the type of thing that Owen is doing whenever he calls somebody a racist. Is that always it's a bad person type of he's when he's calling somebody a racist, he's calling them at the same time a bigot or a bad person or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that there's a certain nuance to racism that I think he's missing. And I also think that
Okay.
I think he's also very concerned about moralism, about being perceived as the more moral person than being just understanding. Like, I'm gonna shut down someone who says something that offends me, yes, but I'm not. But see, I understand that not everyone is at the same, knows the same or understands the same things I do. And while it
Mm.
may not necessarily be my job to educate people, I will do so if I feel that it is worth my time.
All right. Like educate them on racial statistics of a given country and stuff like that.
That and most for me, it's mostly about educating them on on cultural,
Yeah,
uh,
on the culture too.
yeah, why certain things may be acceptable and why things may not be acceptable from
Mhm.
in certain cultural circles.